Welcome back to the Iterative Podcast. This is June, your host for the next 50 minutes or so. In this episode, we've got Sukan back in the roster. And we've also invited Yi from Monks Hill Ventures to talk about the top mistakes founders often make when fundraising. I got both Sukan and Yi to stack rank the top mistakes they often see founders make. So think of from bad to worst. So you get to hear what are the different priorities that are important for an investor. They also talk about how to fix those mistakes and how the current economic downturn will impact fundraising. Without further ado, this is Yi and Sukan. Today we're talking about mistakes you're probably making trying to fundraise. And in this episode, we've got Yi from Monks Hill Ventures and Sukan from Iterative. Yi, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Please introduce yourself so that our listeners know you.
Be happy to. My name is Yi. I'm one of the two co-founders at Monks Hill Ventures. We are a pre-A and Series A early stage venture investor, very much focused on Southeast Asia as our kind of key geographical focus. We've made investments now since 2014, over close to 50 plus companies in the portfolio. Some of the more notable ones are Ninjavan as our very first investment, Haifaz, Glins, KKday, Horangi, etc. So pretty broad swath. And I think we do share some common portfolio companies with Iterative. Gen5, for example, if I recall correctly, at the very least. Coda School as well. So yeah, it's been a good run with you guys. So very happy to be here and happy to share some thoughts with you guys.
Thank you for making time. We really appreciate it. Sukan, even though technically everyone who listens to the podcast will know you, I'm still obliged to ask you to introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name is Sukan. I'm one of the co-founders of Iterative. We're a early stage accelerator in Southeast Asia, focused exclusively on Southeast Asia. I think we started about 2.5 years ago, and I think I've invested in 50 plus companies now, which is kind of like wild. Different model than Yi. They write much larger checks than we do, so don't count our 50 as their 50. But yeah, we. As Yi said, we have a couple companies in common, and the fun fact: Yi is the first investor, I believe, that I met in Singapore before I even moved. I think Yi was like number one, was the very first one. Seems like a while back now, but yeah, Yi, I don't know if you know that actually, but you were the very first.
I remember talking to you a long time ago. Hopefully, I set you on the right path so far.
I mean, I hadn't decided to move, so I'm here. So whatever you said, it must have helped.
I'm glad to be a part of it.
All right, Yi and Sukan, I got the both of you to come prepared and have a stack rank of the top 3 mistakes that you often see founders make. Let's do it in this format because I'm assuming you guys listed it like from top 3 to top 1. So that's like your bad to worst, right? So both of you will take turns to share the list. So Yi, you will go first, and then Sukan, and then the both of you will eventually slowly reveal your list until top 1, which is what you think is the worst mistake founders can make. All right, Yi, take the floor.
Yeah, so I think this is hard. It's hard for me to kind of make a sort of resolve between the bad, the worst, and the worst. But it's these are the kind of some of the pet peeves. When we have conversations with founders, I think one of the things that come across is the clarity in terms of what the founder wants to accomplish in that conversation and in that round. There definitely is room for a back and forth. So a founder doesn't need to come with just a single-minded, transactional kind of view on the conversation, but certainly some clarity and certainty about how much she or he wants to raise, and what is it for, and the timing and the process around it would be helpful. When you leave the room and not have, it's probably the worst when the investor leaves the room and doesn't have a clear sense of exactly what is asked. So clarity for me is up there.
Okay, clarity. Sukan.
I think there's definitely kind of going to be overlap here. I wrote this somewhat differently, and I wrote it as not understanding venture capital. I feel like there's a lot of founders who are kind of like, I need money from these people. And that's all that they just like stop there. And they're just like, okay, how do I get money from these people? And they don't think about like how does Koyi make decisions, and what are the kind of like things that he has to do in order for him to be successful, and how does he think about venture capital and that kind of thing. The easiest way this kind of comes out is um, people have to remember that venture capital is more about how big the win is going to be rather than probability of wins, right? Magnitude of win is actually a bigger deal than probability of win. Sometimes I think founders don't appreciate this, and they're just pitching like, hey, this is like a surefire thing. And it's like, great, this is a surefire thing from 5 million to 10 million, and then it stops. Like, Koyi can't invest in that. He can't do it, right? Like, that's not the return profile. And so I think my number one thing here, and there's a lot to unpack here, but I think a lot of times founders don't have a good understanding of what venture capital is, how venture capitalists think, and everything related to that.
Agree. So the next one for me, and I think somewhat related to that as well, is the whole idea of research. Clearly, research around the asset class, venture capital, the expectations around that. What is the not so much the expectations from the VC, and then you try to match it more in terms of whether their expectation matches your situation, right? To your point, Sukan. But if you kind of go one level down, there's also around the whole research around what kind of fund are you talking to, right? Is this the right stage? Is this the right kind of focus areas that they're looking into? And doing some research about the firm, the individuals you're talking to, what the backgrounds are, right? What they've invested in before. Are there competitive investments that they made before? And are there adjacencies that you can find in the portfolio? So all these things are, sort of things that you should go into a conversation being really prepared. Granted, founders are busy, particularly in the early stage. You're doing three things at the same time at any one time, and going into a meeting really prepped is always a difficult thing to balance. But I think it would be useful when you're talking to an investor.
I don't want to give away my list, but that is higher up on my list. So I think we have some overlap here. But just to kind of like comment on this a little bit, I think that's something that's kind of so key, and I think investors kind of appreciate when a founder comes in and like understands Monks Hill's philosophy and deals that they've done and that kind of stuff. Look. Everybody knows founders have to talk to a lot of investors, which actually is my number two. They don't talk to enough investors. I oftentimes kind of hear founders who are like, oh yeah, I'm fundraising, but I stopped. And I'm like, okay, how many people you talk to? And they're like, we talked to 7. And I was like, you didn't even get past warm-ups, right? I think for our batch, we try to get people to talk to somewhere between 50 and 70 investors. And that's kind of like a real go at it. Now, to Koyi's point, it's hard to do a lot of research on 50 to 70 investors. But when you do research, it really shows that investor that you're thinking about them kind of like uniquely, and that you want them as part of your cap table. It's not just like, I just need Koyi's money. I don't care about Koyi. I don't care about Monks Hill. Just give me money. I don't care. Right. And so I think being able to do some of that preparation, I think, shows investors that you're somebody that does homework, you're prepared for these meetings, you go into business doing things like that, and you're somewhat kind of like picky and thinking about what investors you want. It's not just like money is kind of money. And if there's founders out there who are thinking that money is just money, let me tell you right now, it is not. All the money is the same. It comes with lots of kind of different strings and things depending on kind of the investors. But my number 2 is actually not talking to enough investors. I think the rejection is kind of real, and so people just get kind of disheartened and they kind of stop. You only need one, or at least like a handful. And I think the story I like to tell is Brian for Divvy Homes, which is kind of like a big success now in series, even for their Series A, which Andreessen Horowitz did. He still talked to like 50 investors before Andreessen kind of like wanted to lead their round. So just because you've talked to 30 or 40 investors and everybody has said no, it doesn't mean that people hate you or that no good investor is going to come in. So you got to kind of keep at it.
Yeah, I mean, that definitely resonates with my experience. We do fundraising ourselves as well, right? So can you guys do too?
Yep.
And and a lot of times, that's, I don't think it's a personal issue, and I don't think there's anything personal when an investor says no to you. It's just a question of fit. A lot of times, it's a question of timing. The fund may or may not be at the stage of investing in what you're doing, what you want to do. So you just got to kind of cast a relatively wide net, and cover different corners of the universe and stretch out those corners as much as you can, right? Because you never know what makes sense.
Yeah, and Koi, you know this better than I do, but for the founders out there, when you're raising money for a fund, you talk to like an order of magnitude more LPs than you would for even kind of like VCs, and the LPs are kind of harder. And so this is actually compounded in kind of like venture capital, which was surprising to both Brian and I. We've done a fair bit of fundraising, but LP fundraising is like a whole nother kind of like thing. I think also maybe with the part about not talking to enough investors, investors are their worldview is constantly changing, right? Like Koi might not have believed in something 3 years ago, but there's new evidence that like that might be a thing now. Or and I find myself changing my mind about stuff all the time. Sometimes I hate a space, and then I talk to some founder who is working in that space, and they have some new insight in that space, and all of a sudden I'm like, hey, that actually kind of makes some sense, and they kind of change my mind on it. So I think part of not talking to enough investors is also like, don't be afraid to kind of reach out back out to previous investors. Koi, I don't know how you handle this, but whenever somebody reaches back out to me, and if I've previously said no, my email is always kind of like, what has changed since the last time we talked, right? And that's always kind of the jumping off point from kind of like where it is. Koi, I don't know how you handle those cases.
I absolutely appreciate folks who kind of follow up. It's never a completely shut door. Not because we're afraid of missing out, but because we completely understand that our worldview is limited, particularly when covering so many domains. Founders are the experts, and they are learning, they're seeing everything in action every single day, every single hour. We are seeing a snapshot of things. And your job at some level, we're counting on the founders to give us a bunch of snapshots to see in the bigger picture, something in motion, in the right direction that can get us excited. So it is a process. It's not a transaction. It is a long-term engagement, and so it's something that founders should think of it as a longer-term relationship building than a transactional. Doesn't close, doesn't happen. Move on. I'm not coming back again. Kind of thing. Completely agree.
And Koi, I feel like you and I have talked about this, but I feel like you do this maybe even more so than VCs. You really get to know founders kind of like early in the process. So by the time they're kind of like even at your stage, you kind of have a relationship with them.
Yeah, that's right. I think as amongst the ventures, we pride ourselves, and our core DNA is really, a partnership of ex-founders, operators. We're 5 partners strong in terms of investing partners across the region, so we're on the ground as well. And one of the things that we really do a lot of is to be very open and accessible, because our view is that we are there to help first and foremost, and the process, really to earn the right to invest ultimately. And it is a partnership, and it takes a longish time, right, to get to know someone really well, as opposed to just a 1-hour meeting.
All right, guys, we are at the number 1 spot, the worst mistake a founder can make during fundraising. Koi, do you want to go first?
I think for me personally, this could be really, really subjective, and it's really coming from me personally, is how a founder approach a conversation in terms of the attitude, the approach, the tone. I personally look for a conversation. A founder that is overly salesy, overly coy, overly protective about the information, makes me feel, like this is not going to be a productive conversation. Granted that certainly there's a lot of antsiness about putting information out there, right, and sharing with someone. I like to think that VCs in general are aware that the main currency that VC has is reputation. At Monks Ventures, we take very seriously information that we receive. We make sure that it doesn't get shared with other companies, including our portfolio companies, particularly when it's competitive, etc. We take that very, very seriously because we realize that you just got to lose that trust once, and that trust is gone forever with that one founder, and potentially perpetually, and deeply within the community. So that's a very serious thing for us when we don't take care of information. So I think founders should be relatively open. It's okay to be a bit more vulnerable in terms of being quite open about the fears, the concerns, the risk, because that means that you know where your business is at and what you're thinking through right now. As opposed to everything is hunky dory, everything is perfect. With this new one competitor, we only play in the space, etc., etc. The overly salesy, the overly coy, kind of conversations simply don't work very well for me.
Koi, is there certain things that you feel like you find that founders are the most coy about, but they like shouldn't be? Is there something just like high on your list? Like for me, one of the first things we learned is no investors are going to sign NDAs. If you ask investors to sign an NDA, that's the first sign that like you're very new to this. No investors will sign an NDA, right? That's like one of the first things we kind of learned. But is it metrics that they don't want to share? Is it like concerns that they have? What are those things for you?
Absolutely, the metrics, right? Giving a sense of where the business is at. Now, clearly I understand the sensitivity around that, but without communicating some of that, it's very difficult to understand the state of the business and why someone should be excited about it. We go into conversations with a very first principle mindset. We're trying to understand the business, understand the space here, and we're no expert. You are the expert. We're really trying to understand and put ourselves as much as we can in your shoe to appreciate the situation that we might want to get into. So metrics is a big part of it. Concerns, the second point that you brought up, right? What are the potential issues that you're still working through, the risks that you still want to mitigate? I mean, that is a close second. And again, the flip side of that is if you come at me and go, look, we don't have any major concerns. There's nothing that's worrying me awake. I'm like, wow, your founder is sleeping very well. Then that's probably, problematic too.
Yeah, we have the same view here. I mean, I'll take it even a step further. If you're not willing to share your metrics, we just assume the metrics are terrible. Because in our experience, the people who are like growing quickly, it's like they want to start the conversation with like, look how fast I'm growing. Sure. Like it's the first thing, right? And we have this internal joke, Koi, I'm sure you guys have a similar thing. We can kind of tell, we don't even have to actually look at the graph. We can kind of tell how portfolio companies are doing based on whether their investor update includes a graph or not. And if it does include the graph, it's probably going well. And if it doesn't have a graph, it probably isn't going well. So I think if you're trying to hide metrics because you think that other people might find them or whatever, remember that there's this hidden cost that everybody will just assume it's not that good. So
agree.
Think about that. The second part here with what Koi's point about kind of like challenges and stuff, I think almost all investors understand that startups are hard. We have no illusions about this. We've been in this for a long time, and especially like Iterative and Mengxiu with people who have kind of done startups before. We know there's always problems, right? And so if founders are not open about that, then we are wondering, are they like keeping things to themselves, which is not great? And then the second part is, are they not in touch with reality? Like, are they just like missing something, haven't thought about it? And the best founders that we run across are the ones that they show their metrics, they talk about all that stuff. And then when we ask them like, okay, well, what are your challenges? And they're like, okay, we have 3 challenges. And they can list out structural things that are kind of like linchpins to their business that they're figuring out, but they can also explain what they're doing about it. And to Koi's point about a discussion, the best ones turn it into a discussion, right? They're like, okay, we're struggling with X, Y, and Z. I think it's in that order. Here's what we're doing about them. And then you can turn it around to VCs and be like, Koi, you've seen this before. Like, how do you think about solving X? Right. And you're kind of getting them kind of involved in that kind of stuff. And I always, Brian and I always tell our companies that's like a judo move to like in the like pitch to kind of get them working on your problems and you're grappling with them. But investors like it too, because if investors get on your cap table, that's basically what's going to happen, right? Is they're going to work with you on it. They want to see that you are honest, that you are kind of tied to the realities of your business and you're like actively working on them. So,
yeah. And to add on to the earlier point about metrics, the situations where founders may get too disingenuous with how they present metrics. Pet peeve for me is always the cumulative metrics, right? It always is up and to the right.
Yep.
No matter how bad or how good a month or quarter you have. I don't know. I think founders, going down that path or using sleight of hands of sort like that is really disingenuous. You're going to put off the clueful investors and go, the guys who really know are sophisticated, are experienced, going to go, you're trying to pull a fast one. But then you're going to get, sort of traction with the folks who are perhaps less clueful. And is that really the investors you want to attract to your cap table?
Yep. Kwai, let's do a mini list of metric shenanigan pet peeves. You were saying cumulative, which I think is great. We always kind of argue. We always ask people too, is like, is this cumulative or is this kind of like a rate? My other one is they always show their traction graph, and most of it is projections, and then all of a sudden their last month and then the next month's projection, all of a sudden there's like 3x growth, and they're on a completely different trajectory after that. And the game that I like to play, this is the first time ever admitting it, is sometimes I look at the projections and I can tell what percent growth rate they use for all of the months going forward after that. And I'm like, you literally just said month over month, 30% for the next 5 years. Like, like there's no thought about like, how do you generate this? Okay, are you hitting some inflection point? Like, it's just 30%.
Yeah. Yeah.
You should invest, right? So that's one of mine.
To add to that list, I think one of the things that, I think it's a bit more nuanced is in terms of the quality of the revenue. There are many different types of revenue. And there's always a whole argument about what is a GAAP revenue and what is a revenue. At the early stage, the thing I really care about is how much value are you capturing, right? If you're really showing a GMV of 10 million, but your cost is 9.999 million, that doesn't really matter that your revenue, quote unquote, GAAP wise is 10 million. So I think that part of it needs to be carefully handled. It's always a conversation about how do you build a sustainable way of capturing value that's defensible, that's sustainable, that is, and you have found that fit in the value proposition to be able to capture that much value defensively. So yeah, the pet peeve for me is, really being loose about, hey, revenue, right? And what that is.
And maybe let me elaborate for founders why this is a thing. If you show this like 10 mil GMV, 9.99 million in kind of like cost and stuff, then if you're pitching to Kwai will see right through it, first of all. But then the second part is then Kwai is like, is that how you think of your business? Like, you think this is going well? And then now there's this kind of like, he doesn't think you know how to run businesses now because you think this is like okay or good, right? And in reality is you might just be kind of hiding in stuff. But the flip side of it is like, he now thinks you don't know how to run businesses, right? Which is like also kind of bad.
Yeah. So what's your number 3 or the worst, Sukan?
So this is related to Kwai's, but mine is poor preparation, and this is a big bucket. So let me kind of break it down. But I think sometimes when founders want to fundraise, they like wake up one day and they're like, I need to fundraise, and they like start fundraising like that afternoon, right? And if you want to fundraise properly, you need to do a lot of prep work before you even talk to your first investor. So one, and this is what Kwai was talking about, you need a hit list. You need a list of investors that you want to talk to, and you need to kind of do homework on it. If you are going to talk to about 50 or 70 people as investors, you need to come up with what that list is. And then you need to have a system and a CRM around how to do it. And then you need to qualify that list, right? So look, if you're raising 100K, Kwai can't write you a 100K check. He even if he really wanted to, he can't. Monk.Sil doesn't do that, right? And so you kind of need to go through your list and find out like, okay, who's the appropriate stage? And look, maybe you meet with Kwai because you want to know him and you want to kind of get to know him for like later stages, but you want to do homework on all of these investors and kind of what it is, and what stages they are and that kind of thing. And then you want to do like the basic stuff. How much money are you trying to raise? When do you want to close by? What milestones are you going to hit? This is the advice we give our companies. The use of funds slide we don't love it that much if it's like, 10% engineering, 50% marketing. The thing we like more is I'm raising $1 million to get from 1 million in GMV to 10 million in GMV, right? Like, I think for investors, that's an easier thing to kind of cross. So you need to do all of this prep work ahead of time to prepare yourself for fundraising. One of the things we care a lot about is like, you need to kind of create FOMO. And the only way to create FOMO is to just like talk to a lot of people in a shorter period of time. And in order to like do that, you have to kind of be very organized. So poor preparation for me is kind of like the biggest one.
Yeah, I kind of agree absolutely with that. And it is, fundraising is a process. It's a relatively long process in many instances, and you learn a lot along the way. And so you also want to kind of stage your conversations at some level because the first 5 or 10 will be relatively rough. Right? It takes time to be smoother at it. You take time to kind of go, what exactly I'm trying to say with this slide. I need to change it, some more and get it more refined, and so that messaging, the narrative gets better over time, without a doubt. And so you almost want to practice with friendlier investors, perhaps, who are more forgiving, or may not be as sweet within the sweet spot of your sweet spots. But it's hard to it really needs time to get better. And at some point you start getting really good at it. You start expecting certain kind of objections and questions, and you know how to best explain it. You know how to size up the conversation, to size up the other side of the table, to go how far, how deep, how high level, how low level you need to get from the conversation. So that takes a lot of practice and a lot of continual pitching.
I'll tell the story that I tell. This is exactly what Guai is saying. I tell the story that we tell our companies at Fundraising Bootcamp, which we just started, Guai. The story that I tell them is I was reading this, I think it was like a Vanity Fair article about Chris Rock, who is this famous American comedian. And it was about his process. So how does he come up with his material? And I think a lot of times people think people like Chris Rock, it's like, I don't know, some intrinsic God-given talent, and he just shows up to Netflix specials and he's like, I am funny, let me bestow comedy on you. And the reality is not the case. So he lives in New York, and before a Netflix special or a big show, he shows up to random comedy sellers in New York completely unannounced with a yellow notepad, and he's just trying material and bombing and taking notes on, like, is this funny? Okay, it's not funny. Okay, what if I rearrange the order of this? Okay, is that funny? Okay, not funny. And he's just doing this over and over and over. And by the time he gets to the Netflix special, or it's Madison Square Garden or wherever, he knows this works, right? He's got the ordering down. He's got the rhythm. He's got the right content. He's like done all of that stuff. And so that's what we kind of always tell our companies too, is like, that's how you want to produce like a pitch. It's not just like sitting down in a room and kind of like, okay, I got it. It's like, you need this process of like trying it out. You may think this is a really interesting thing about your company, but like, if nobody else thinks it's interesting, it's not going to be effective, right? And so you want to kind of figure that out. So it's exactly what Guai was saying, but that's our like story that we always tell.
Okay, guys. I'm going to quickly recap. So, top 3 mistakes from Soo-Ken is poor preparation, not talking to investors enough, and then not enough research on venture capital. And then from Guai, it's being coy or secretive, especially on metrics, concerns, poor research, and then the lack of clarity. So I asked you guys to list on 3, but I'm sure there are more that you guys wanted to put in because June told me to only do 3. You guys only gave 3. What are, I guess, honorable mentions that you guys wanted to include but didn't? Guai, you can go first.
Well, this is maybe not so much a kind of a mistake, but an attitude that one should adopt going into talking to investors. I get that it is not a fun process. I get that it sucks to be rejected, almost like 9.5 out of 10 times. You're almost boiling the ocean looking for that one lead investor. And you're being stripped naked almost every time you go in. It's scrutinizing up and down, looking for all the flaws in your business plan. It is a very, difficult process, and sometimes, almost, difficult, right, intellectually. But there's a silver lining because you're learning from every single conversation, right? Every single participant in the ecosystem, the capital markets, represent a view of the world. And there's always a certain pattern to how people think and view. And you are seriously seeing where the capital is flowing and how it's affecting where the future of the world might be. So you are part of the process, and there's a lot to be learned from every single conversation. So if you can kind of rise above it and get to enjoy it, there's actually a lot to be taken from those conversations, right? Every single point of data, every conversation with the investor, ideally you should be taking something away from it. Right? So go in with that sort of attitude, that mindset that I want to get something from this conversation too. And ask yourself at the end of the conversation, what else might I take away here? Right? And not rush through it.
Just to add on to this point, I don't know if this is good, Guai. I don't know if this has ever happened to you. I've gone into a meeting with a founder. We've kind of talked about it. I poked a bunch of holes. I didn't really like the business that much. but they were so thoughtful about how they handled the challenges. It was almost like they turned the call into them getting my opinion and taking notes about like, okay, so yeah, talk to me more about this. Okay, like how would you think about doing this? And they were like using me as to like test their own mental model about what their business is. I came out of the meeting almost being like, oh my gosh, I should invest, primarily because if they're so good at this, like they're going to do this with everyone, and then they're going to like learn from everybody. Like, even if I don't like what they're doing now, and we're much earlier stage, but I almost am like, they're going to figure something out in the next 3 months because they have such a good attitude about how to do this. Like, so I've definitely made some investments, just like based on that. Do you have experiences like that, Wayne?
I do. I think what that reflects, largely is the intrinsic, intellectual curiosity of the founder, and it's such an important trait that will kind of carry you through the entire journey of building a company. Because there's a lot to be learned. You're feeling the edges of every single thing you're doing for the first time, and trying to push the edge at the same time. So if you don't have the intellectual curiosity that's in you, it's going to be a very painful experience. So absolutely, absolutely. I think when I see those characteristics, it really kind of jumps off off the page for me.
All right, my honorable mention, and Koi, I wonder what your take on this is. It's talking to investors too early.
Hmm.
And maybe this is kind of like a my stage thing, but oftentimes when I'm talking to founders, sometimes, especially when they're like pre any kind of like traction or kind of validation, and for all the founders out here, and Koi, tell me if I'm wrong, I don't take surveys as validation. They are kind of like some evidence, but it's not validation to me. But in this day and age, it's so potentially cheap to validate things that it's not, you don't need to raise like $500,000 to like test an idea anymore. That was more of the case when maybe I was kind of like growing up 20 years ago or something like that. But it's not the case anymore. And then the second part of it is, sometimes I feel like I always tell founders that they need to convince themselves this is something they need to work 5 to 7 years on before they worry about convincing me. Like, the first hurdle is actually you need to convince yourself you're going to spend the next 7 years of your life working on this thing. And if you convince me first, you take my money, and then you haven't convinced yourself, you could get locked in for like 5 to 7 years working on this thing that you find out you don't actually care about. Or worse, it's not a good idea and you feel like you're just wasting your time, right? Which is a hard truth that I have had conversations with other founders about much more. And can we swear on this podcast? I know it's our podcast. Can we swear on this podcast?
Yes, I'm allowing
Yes?
it.
Okay. Okay. I apologize for swearing here, but the phrase that I hear from founders who get stuck in this, and they're often very young people they basically just wanted to start a startup, and the first VC that would write them a check, they like did that idea, and they basically spent the next 3 to 5 years polishing shit. Because they were like, I knew 18 months in, this was a bad idea and this will never be big. But when you take people's money, you have a responsibility to kind of like be stewards of that money and kind of do the right thing. And they spent the next 3 to 5 years just like eking out something that they like didn't really believe in. And they oftentimes missed out on opportunities that they would have been much more interested in pursuing. So don't raise money and don't talk to investors like too early. Make sure you clear all these like internal personal hurdles first.
Sorry, what's the curse word that you use? I didn't
Shit.
catch it.
Polishing shit.
That's wow. I was expecting worse. Oh, this is a PG show.
I don't know. I think this is the first time. This is the first time somebody's sworn on the podcast.
I know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I hear you. I suspect you probably see a lot more of it than we do, since we kind of invest in the later stages. But for me, I think it's just again, we tend to stay pretty accessible even for folks who are just thinking about ideas, and we completely welcome that, and we calibrate the conversation based on what it was set up to be. And so if it's about just bouncing things off, getting opinions, we've seen a lot. Do you think this makes sense? Is it new? Is it differentiated? Happy to give those opinions. But you're absolutely right. If a founder uses a fundraising conversation to kind of probe the edges to get validated, that it's again the inexperienced, more sophisticated investors will see through that and go, yeah, this guy is not ready. He's not sure, right? And then you're gonna get possibly more traction with folks that are maybe not as sophisticated, possibly.
I wanted to jump into, I guess, what can founders, so I know you guys mentioned it already. So things like being more organized, talking to friendly investors to practice your pitch. Koi, I'm just curious because Suken and I, we were in another podcast and we spoke about like advice that we've been giving founders. I was wondering for you, what advice have you been giving to founders fundraising in this environment specifically?
Hmm. Um, I think it is clear that things are slowing down. There are fewer investors who are actually participating in the market, particularly in the stages that our portfolio companies will be heading into Series B and Series C. So conversations are going to take longer, and founders want to be a lot sharper about their pitches, their narratives, their conversations. All the things that I mentioned earlier will apply. Be very clear about who they're talking to and what they might be looking for, and that's where we kind of provide a lot of help as well, given our experience working with these investors ourselves in other situations. Um, and and investors are going to be looking for fundamentals, are going to be much more stronger about the business fundamentals, value propositions, and all of that. Um, what a lot of founders were able to do to generate excitement just by showing incredible growth alone is not going to be sufficient, and we all know that now. And so that has passed. I don't think it's going to come back anytime soon. So there's going to be a lot of need to be able to articulate what the value propositions are that's defensible. Um, Look, I think we are fortunate, and I'm happy to say that when we work with our portfolio companies, that's always been the kind of mantra, the first principles that we have been emphasizing on. It's much easier when you've always been on that path, right? Trying to grow and while maintaining a certain kind of fundamentals and margins. It gets much harder when you're trying to quote unquote pivot your business model to go that direction. There's a lot of things you got to fix organizationally, process, business model, etc. Um, but yeah, that's what investors would be looking for right now, a lot more than before. So be prepared to take a bit longer to close to get any sort of lead investors. The field is thinner now for sure. I'm not sure, Sukan, you have any. Is that what you're seeing as well from some of your portfolio companies that have raised subsequent rounds?
Yeah, it's the market has definitely slowed down. It's taking longer. Valuations are coming down. So I think the advice that we've been giving our companies who are hitting these like later stages, you need to be honest and realistic that the market has changed. And so, any valuations that you said you thought of for comparable companies from 6 months ago, you basically just throw them out the window, right? Like you're in a very different environment from that. And I think the primary advice we say to people is what is it? Survival is a necessity of success. Like you need to not die. And so you need to kind of like act accordingly. And whether that's, look, sometimes you're going to have to accept lower valuations than you like. These processes are going to take longer. You're just going to have to kind of do all of that stuff, right? Now, look, if you can get a lot of people interested and you can get higher valuations, fantastic. But I think in this kind of day and age, you just need to be realistic about that. We also tell people that when you talk to investors, it's good to have a realistic kind of framework for how you're thinking about the market, because investors don't know how long this is going to last. I mean, Kwai, you're smarter than me, but like I have no idea whether this is going to be 3 months, 6 months, 2 years. I don't know. Okay, 5 years probably not, right? But like I don't know, and chances are Kwai doesn't know either. And so when whatever investors you're talking to, they don't know, and so what they're looking for is can this founder navigate this environment? And so look, if it ends up being 2 years, can they come up with a plan on how to kind of stretch this out for 2 years so they don't die, right? Or look, if it's 6 months, are they going to be able to navigate and figure out that this is only a 6-month thing? Then they can hit the gas after it's kind of over, right? And so I think this type of scenario planning is something we've been working with our portfolio companies. Make one plan that is cockroach mode, more or less. Make one plan that is like, hey, if this ends soon, how do we hit the gas? And then somewhere in the middle. And I think that's been helpful for them going into investors because they can talk about these plans and the investors know that they're kind of thinking about it in this like probabilistic way. So
Agree. And in fact, the conversation gets a lot more granular. from my perspective, the advice that I give to founders is that you need to have a plan that's default alive, meaning you know how to tweak your business model, or given your existing business model, get to a point where you're no longer reliant on capital to keep you alive. Now, there may be some gap in terms of what you need to do to get to that point, and maybe the funding is needed for you to get there. And let's be honest about it. So, if that's a situation, then you may recommend a different valuation. The second situation might be that, look, the competition has thinned out now. Now the opportunity is in front of you. You are the leader. Now maybe it's time to consolidate the field, right? To really dominate and become the clear, undisputed leader. That is a very different fundraising conversation. And then the fundraising plan becomes about that. But my point ultimately is about the granularity of the objective, right? The strategic objective of the fundraising is not always about staying alive. It's also about potentially taking higher ground, right? When the field is more open. So all those things, I think that level of conversation and thoughtfulness needs to go into the whole fundraising process as well.
And that conversation is actually a really good one to have with investors who you're talking about to join the round, because you want to be on the same page with them, right? If I'm going to Koyi and I'm trying to raise money, and I think I'm in a situation to consolidate the market, win all of it, and that kind of stuff. Koyi disagrees and thinks that we should kind of be in cockroach mode. We need to figure that out, like at the very beginning before Koyi puts in money. I don't want to sit in my first board meeting and I'd be like, oh, I'm going to do all this stuff. And Koyi's like, what are you talking about? Like, you absolutely should not be doing that, right? Like, that's not what Koyi signed up for. And so you want to have that conversation early on and make sure life easier after you kind of like raise money with investors. Make sure you're on the same page.
Exactly. And in fact, granularity, there's another level in between, which is you want to build a bunch of stuff because you think that bunch of stuff is going to be more relevant now, or, so that reinforces your position and gets you more revenue at a better margin. But that kind of conversation needs to be had, right? Are those lists of things you want to build and raise money for still relevant in this short time window? Is it to build for the long term, or is it to build for the short term? Right. And so that will kind of be the ground up conversation before you get to the point about, okay, is this worth fundraising for? Is the market going to give you money for doing those things? Right. So that level of granularity actually becomes a lot more critical in this environment, as opposed to, raised 8 million, 10% goes to engineering, 20% goes to sales. Yeah. So a lot more granularity is needed.
Koyi, earlier you mentioned that it's important for founders to have a good attitude and a good mentality about fundraising. But there is such a thing called rejection fatigue, right? Founders keep hearing no's after no's after no's, and that can take a toll on somebody. How are you helping founders navigate through that? How are you helping them mentally?
I think, mental health is a big topic. There's a lot of things you can do programmatically to do it. But when you get really kind of into the trenches, fundraising is an exercise that we like to do with the founder very closely with. So you share in the defeat, you learn from the defeat together, and so I think that the shared, sort of experience is important, right? So the founder knows that they're not alone in doing this, and I think it's having the ability to kind of share this with other folks. Now, let me be clear. The founders are always going to be bearing the brunt of any conversation. Yeah, they're first and foremost front and center. They're the ones, doing the 1 hour call and all of that. I'm not there. But I try to be there post the call, checking in very quickly, post-mortem the conversation, understand how I can potentially side channel, right, back channel with the investors that they just spoke to understand more. In situations where they may need a bit more clarification, maybe, post that one pitch, investors may be able to do it, right? Post that call in the back channel. So I think, providing all these thoughts and ideas to help founders will give them a bit more of a boost, right? They're not doing this alone, right? And there may be other ways to kind of optimize for the conversation. So it is about partnership. It is a lot about, taking this road together, because it's a tough road. Yeah. So can you imagine, as a portfolio manager of some sort, Sue-Ken, you're managing 50 companies, and everyone that's going to come to you and pour the sorrows about fundraising. But there's something to be said about seeing a lot, right? You bring that overarching view, you can bring that pattern recognition to the founders, and they realize they're just one of many data points in the same pattern. They're not alone from that perspective too. It's not unique to them, and that oftentimes can make them feel like much better too. So, what do you think? You guys, how are your portfolio companies taking the environment and the climate?
I mean, I think by the time they get to you, they've like fundraised before. So I feel like for us, it's like we're like trying to prep them for how bad this is going to be, and I think that's the first step. We're just as honest with them as possible. I mean, literally the first slide in our fundraising bootcamp kickoff is fundraising is brutal. There's no sugarcoating, and I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's going to be terrible. And I mean, we have founders like call us and they're like crying and stuff. This is like, it's really bad, right? So I think the first thing going on is just know it's going to be pretty bad. It's bad for everybody. You're not unique. And I say this in a nice way, meaning like, if you find it extra hard, it doesn't mean you suck. Like, this sucks for everybody. So I think kind of going in with the right expectations. We also tell them that there is no magic like bullet. There's no secret that we're going to tell you that is going to be like, oh, this is going to make it kind of like fun. And it's not. It's horrible for everybody. It's horrible for Brian and I. It's bad for everybody. So I think going in with the expectations. I think the last part maybe about like how we kind of like help out and how it sounds like you are. Sometimes it's helpful to have a structure that you can kind of like lean on, and your investors are part of this. And one thing that's great about investors is we're not in the room with you all the time in these calls, and we're almost kind of, we can be a little bit more objective, having been the person, and what you have to do is too, having been the people in the room before. It's sometimes hard to make out heads or tails about what's actually happening. Is this just how I'm feeling? Like, how do I see? I'm like too close to all of it, and it's really nice to have somebody like Wei to be able to talk to and be like, hey, here's the feedback I'm getting. How do I make kind of heads or tails or kind of what's going on here? And I think having a third party who can kind of look at that objectively, they've been in that room before, they can kind of be like, oh, okay, cool. I know everybody is saying this, but I actually think the problem is kind of like here. Okay, let me work with you on how to do this. And so I think being able to lean on somebody who is maybe not as emotionally attached to it, but is still has the same kind of skin in the game as you, as in like they also want you to fundraise and all this kind of stuff, I think is like really helpful and important.
Great.
Okay, guys. I think that's a good way to wrap up the show. Ko-Yi, Soo-Ken, thank you for making time to be on this podcast. Ko-Yi, where can listeners find you?
You can find us on our website at www.monkshill.com and monkshil.com. You can reach us, on LinkedIn as well. We're on Facebook, and we're happy to kind of have a conversation about what you're working on.
And that was Ko-Yi and Soo-Ken. If you like this episode, do subscribe and leave us a review at wherever you listen to your podcast. We'd love to know what you think. If you prefer to read as well, we have a bi-weekly newsletter called Iterative Insights. This is where we break down startups, growth, fundraising, pretty much anything else that stresses you out as a founder in Southeast Asia. It's easy to subscribe. Just go to iterative.substack.com. That's iterative.substack.com. Thank you for listening, and stay tuned for the next episode.